Dear audience, the hairs on your body will stand on end when you hear the story I am presenting to you today. As I was reading the incident, believe me, there was a strange feeling at every step. Hope you will like this story very much, so listen carefully from beginning to end, then let's start the story. Haynes Road Encounter. Something stood in the middle of Creek Road, and it took 2 steps toward the truck. David's fearless husky had survived bears, avalanches, and brutal Alaskan winters, but on this road, the dog would not even leave the vehicle. In a remote road outside Haines, Alaska, David began seeing a huge upright figure watching from the tree line. It followed his truck through the forest, left massive tracks around his family home, and one winter night stopped directly outside his bedroom window, breathing on the other side of the glass. Full story. A true horror story from Haines, Alaska. His dog had survived avalanches, bear encounters, and 3 Alaskan winters without flinching. The first time it refused to leave the truck, David knew whatever was on that road was something different entirely.
David had lived in Haines his entire life. 800 people tucked between mountains and sea in southeastern Alaska. He had grown up hunting and fishing with his father and uncles, comfortable in the wilderness the way only someone raised inside it can be. Creek Road was as familiar to him as his own kitchen. 3 miles of narrow gravel from the edge of town to his family's property. Dense spruce and hemlock on both sides, a creek running parallel, mountains rising steeply on one side. He had driven it in rain, in snow, in complete darkness, hundreds of times. He had never once felt afraid. That changed on a Tuesday in mid-October. He left school after basketball practice around 6 in the evening. Already dark, light rain falling. He turned onto Creek Road, headlights cutting through the mist, thinking about homework and an upcoming game, until something crossed the road in front of him. He hit the brakes hard. The truck skidded her wet gravel. Whatever had crossed was enormous, much larger than a moose. It moved upright on 2 legs with a gait that belonged to nothing David had ever seen or could name. By the time the truck stopped, it was gone into the trees. There was only the empty road, the rain on the windshield, and the sound of his own breathing. He told himself it was a moose, that the darkness and rain had distorted his perception. He drove home without stopping and said nothing to his parents. He went to bed and didn't sleep well. 3 nights later, returning from a friend's house at 10 o'clock, he saw it again. This time he slowed down and got a clear look. The creature stood at the tree line, fully upright, at least 8 feet tall. Dark fur covering a body massive enough that the trees behind it seemed suddenly small. Its eyes caught his headlights and returned a greenish shine. They looked at each other through the rain for several seconds. Then it walked deliberately into the forest, not fleeing, not startled, walking the way something walks when it simply chooses to leave.
David went straight to his father. He expected skepticism. Instead, his father listened carefully, asked specific questions about the gate and the location, and was quiet for a long moment before telling David to avoid driving that road alone at night for a while. He didn't explain why. He didn't offer any name for what David had seen. David began asking around carefully. He discovered that Creek Road had a reputation among older residents, a quiet one, the kind people don't volunteer but will confirm if asked directly. Sightings had been reported for decades. A teacher who had lived in Haines for 40 years told him privately that the Tlingit, the indigenous people of the region, had long understood that certain stretches of forest were inhabited by presences that predated everything humans had built there. He didn't say he believed those stories, but he didn't say he didn't. David's dog, a large husky mix, normally fearless, began refusing to get out of the truck on that road after dark. The animal pressed against David and whimpered with his ears flat. David had never seen him behave that way in 3 years. He started watching the dog more carefully than he watched the tree line.
The dog never lied. In early November, David convinced his friend Fred to ride the road with him. Fred had been making jokes about David's imagination for weeks. They drove slowly just after sunset, both watching the forest. For 2 miles, nothing happened. Fred's impatience was filling the cab like a smell. Then they rounded the curve near the 2-mile marker. The creature was standing in the middle of the road.
30 yards away, fully in the headlights, enormous and upright, arms hanging almost to its knees. It stood completely still and looked at them the way something looks at you when it has absolutely no reason to be afraid. Then, without warning, it took one deliberate step toward the truck, then another. David threw the truck into reverse and floored it, nearly losing the road on the first curve. When he looked forward again, the road was empty. Fred said nothing the entire drive back. When they reached David's house, he said he needed to go home immediately. He never spoke about what they had seen. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. When David tried to bring it up afterward, Fred changed the subject. But David noticed that Fred stopped making jokes about his imagination and started taking a different route whenever he visited. The sightings continued through winter. David saw the creature at least a dozen more times, always in the same 3-mile stretch, always at night or in the dim winter evenings. Sometimes it moved through the trees parallel to the road, keeping pace with the truck. Other times it simply stood and watched him pass. His dog's behavior grew more extreme, refusing to eat before those drives, trembling from the moment they turned onto Creek Road until the moment they turned off it. Then, in February, David came home from basketball practice and found tracks in the snow around his family's property. 18 inches long, humanoid in structure, but not human, too wide, too deep, with visible claw impressions at the tips. The tracks circled the house. They stopped at windows. They approached the front door and then led away toward the tree line and disappeared. His father photographed them and reported them to Alaska Fish and Game as unusual bear tracks. The officer who came out examined them, looked genuinely confused, and offered no explanation. That night, David heard something walking outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps in the snow, moving around the perimeter of the house. He lay in his bed and listened to them slow and stop directly beneath his bedroom window. Then he heard it breathing on the other side of the glass, slow and deep, close enough that he could hear the texture of it. His dog was under the bed, pressed against the wall, completely silent for the first time. David did not move. He did not look toward the window. He controlled his breathing and stared at the ceiling and waited with a stillness that he had never had to find in himself before. After several minutes, though it felt much longer, the footsteps moved away. In the morning, fresh tracks in the snow. Several large branches torn from the trees near the house, wrenched off at heights and angles that had no explanation. His parents finally accepted that this required more than they knew how to give it. His father contacted Tlingit elders from the community and asked for guidance. They came to the property. They performed a ceremony David was not permitted to witness. He sat on the porch in the November cold and listened to singing from inside his own home, smelled smoke that wasn't coming from the wood stove, and understood for the first time that there were protocols in the world that his education had never prepared him for. When the elders came out, they told his family what they told anyone who asked. They were living in a place where they were not the only occupants. Something old held territory there. Respect and caution were not suggestions, they were the terms. After the ceremony, the creature stopped approaching the house, but it never left Creek Road. David continued seeing it through the end of the school year at the tree line, in his headlights, moving parallel through the forest as he drove past. Every time,
without fail, always in that same 3-mile stretch, always watching. The last time David drove Creek Road, the night before he left for college in Anchorage, the creature was standing at the tree line in the dark. He slowed the truck and stopped. They looked at each other for a long moment, the same way they had looked at each other on that first rainy October night, except that now David understood something he hadn't then. It wasn't waiting for him to be afraid. It wasn't threatening him. It was simply present, the way something is present in a place it is occupied for longer than anyone alive can measure. He drove away. He didn't look back. His parents sold the property the following year and moved closer to town. They never explained the decision to relatives who asked. David is 23 now. He works as a surveyor in Anchorage, and his job takes him into remote areas across the state. He has learned to trust what his body knows before his mind catches up. The particular stillness that falls over a forest when something in it is paying close attention to you. He trusts that signal now without question. He has researched similar accounts across Alaska and the Pacific Northwest and found hundreds of them, maybe thousands, from people who don't speak publicly for fear of exactly the response Fred gave: silence and a different route home. David doesn't need you to believe him. The creature on Creek Road has never needed anyone's belief to be there. But he does want you to know one thing. The night it stood outside his window, breathing, it could have broken that glass without effort. It didn't. Whatever was out there, it wasn't trying to get in. It was making sure David knew it could. Fred rode that road with David, saw the creature from 30 yards away in full headlights, and never said a single word about it again for the rest of his life. If that was you in the passenger seat, would you have stayed silent to protect yourself? Or would you have told someone knowing no one would believe you? This is a true horror story told by someone who actually lived through it. Dear brothers and sisters, whether it was a human or a horrible ghost djinn, must comment. Thank you, everyone.